Good. And I'm just going to get my phone off of coverage here. There we go.
Turn my sound off there.
Oh,
okay, so I don't know if I should put my earpods in. Oh, no. Taking us part of your day to have this chat. I'm really excited to have you here and to get into some of this stuff officially on the record.
Same. Yeah.
So for our
same.
listeners, I'll just do a brief intro here. So Alison is an entrepreneur, executive leader, mentor, and writer in consumer packaged goods, natural health, cannabis, and education since 2003. She began her career studying natural medicine, then pivoted into business, acquiring a business degree, and then dabbled in some postgraduate research in toxic emotions in the workplace. That's a heavy topic. And with all of that foundation, she has built and now oversees a portfolio of businesses that foster positive, healthy, and productive workplaces. You know, you've definitely been through it for sure.
Yeah, just a few things.
You know, there's a book, it's called Mastery. I think it was Graham Greene. I'll look, but it talks about how as entrepreneurs, we sort of like go from all these different avenues, but eventually it all sort of intersects into one thing. So
yeah, so true.
You know, that's just how we roll.
Nice.
So I know we've chartered a lot of the same paths in life, and maybe let's start with that. So what has led you to this entrepreneurial, self-employed life?
Yeah, and that's a great question, right? Because I kind of look back in all of my history, and I think I had my first job when I was 13 years old, right? Like I think I was bussing at Smitty's Pancake House in Port Alberni, and so I remember just from a very young age that I always wanted to make money. That was always a thing, right? But when I go back to the entrepreneurship side of things, like as long as I can remember, I have done something entrepreneurial, even back when I was super, super young. I started even by making really ugly drawings when I was 5 years old and going and forcing my neighbors to buy them. Right. So I was totally that kid that would like, this is such a beautiful drawing. Can you please buy it from me? Right. And of course they'd feel bad and I'd make money. But then from that early age, like I just kind of had that taste for what it's like to create something and to make money from it, right? And then, when it came to more official entrepreneur things in my early 20s was when I had my kind of first like official entrepreneur gig. I think I was about 23 when I started my first business in the all natural spa and wellness space. And then from there, I sort of bounced back and forth from, having an executive role with, another company in the natural medicine space. And then I would kind of go back to entrepreneurship and then I'd be an executive again. And I'd sort of just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But leading to where I am now, I think like the biggest driver really was what I experienced in the workplace after becoming a mother, right? And so, I actually was an executive when I ended up having Ivana. And so I started to experience this whole wave of things that I'd never seen before. And as a woman in executive space, you already kind of have these obstacles just as a woman without a child. But then all of a sudden, when I had a child, all of a sudden there was this whole nother level of kind of like discrimination and limitations and lack of understanding of work-life balance. And it was just so incredibly overwhelming and intense that it really pushed me to kind of realize what matters in life, right? What matters in life is, friends and family and relationships. And I wasn't fostering that when I was in the executive world, right? I was spending all of my time with my coworkers. I was traveling, all over the world. I think I even remember the first year or 2 years of Ivana's life, because I remember I was working in the cannabis industry like while I was pregnant, actually, and then while she was little, I was in that industry, and I didn't take like a full year of mat leave or anything. But I remember, I think I missed 4 months of her life, like in total, right? In the first 2 years of I'd been in Germany, and then I was in New York, and then I was in LA, and then Las Vegas, and it was just this constant thing. I'm like, I'm spending more time with people who I work with than I am with my own friends and my own family. And I was like, this has to change, right? So I really wanted that flexibility. I wanted that kind of freedom. Like, even though entrepreneurs, it's funny because, anyone who is an entrepreneur and listening to this, they're probably like, this isn't flexible, this isn't freedom, we work all the time. Yes, you do. And I do work a lot, but I still do have the ability to pick my daughter up from school. I don't have to get after school care because I have the flexibility to do my own schedule, right? I can pick her up. I could take her to any appointments that she needs through the day. I can, take a little bit of time off if I want to during, specific hours. And I don't have to ask anybody for permission, right? So I think that was the really big piece that was it was kind of like the nail in the coffin for me. And, what's kind of coming to my mind right now is something that Mark Cuban said, Mark Cuban from Shark Tank. And he said, I would rather work 80 hours a week for myself than 40 hours for somebody else. And at first, when I was like, you're nuts, man. But then I sat back and thought about it. I'm like, I get it. I totally get it. Right. So that's definitely played a big part, that whole scenario, to getting us where we are right now.
Yeah, it reminds me of a few things that I made note to respond to here are, like how our idea of success changes
Yeah.
as we become mothers. And I think just as we become older, but that idea of success it's not that, maybe when we were younger, the idea of being able to fly all over the world and have these executive positions was like, wow, that's success. But now
I
it's more like having,
matter.
yeah, having the freedom to do what you want and to create the schedule you want, and the money is just a means, to provide that. So working for yourself definitely allows you to have that freedom, and that means so much more than any
Totally.
title or, you know
You got it.
traditional words of success or ideals of success.
So true. So true.
Yeah, and then the other piece was like how executive roles and how sort of corporate, I don't know what you call it, corporate world, corporate life, sort of goes along with the male hormone cycle. Like a male hormone cycle resets every 24 hours. So the 9 to 5 is actually built around a male hormone cycle, whereas
What? This is a
females,
piece I didn't know.
yeah, whereas females, obviously we're on like a 28-day hormone cycle. So that 9 to 5 is really hard. And then, throwing in motherhood and shifting up and aging and anything really just adds to that sort of complexity of working in an executive corporate position.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. That's something that I really didn't know. But yeah, just one more thing in our world that was designed for the fellas.
Right? Yeah, which makes it harder. And I think which also like drives a lot of women like us to entrepreneurship and self-employment is just because of these things that just don't fit with our life. For me, I have a problem with authority, but
What do you
we don't have that
mean?
things. I'm
No, I
working on
hear
it.
you.
So that's definitely a long and winding road. And I mean, they say the path is never a straight line, but like what keeps
Yeah.
you motivated? What keeps you going? This is, it's challenging being self-employed and,
Yeah.
being motivated every day,
It's so
especially with
true.
all that up against you.
Yeah. And I think you really made a good point there, just talking about the long and winding road, right? And I kind of liken it to the peaks and valleys of life in general, right? Where, there were times in my life where, I was riding super high and just like, this is amazing, life is awesome. And then all of a sudden you're in this valley and you're just like, this is terrible. Everything bad happens to me all the time. Nothing good ever happens. And then, you're back to the peak, and then you're in the valley, and then you're in the peak, and then you're in the valley. But I think the most important thing for me, and I don't know if it was just something that I was born with, I'm assuming. It's just like I have this internal fire. It just burns, right? And I can see the end game of what I want in my life. And I just keep going for it, right? And so, that is, paired with an unnatural obsession with Starbucks. I could say that keeps me going a lot, right? Grandes. But really, it is that end game. It's that constant striving for enlightenment, right? So, the more awake that I get as I go through life and the more things I learn, then the more interested I become in learning more and then doing more and helping more people. And it really is a beautiful thing to look back and to realize that I do have this motivation. Like, I know that I can change things. I know that I can create things. And I really know where I want to be in life because I've been in every different situation in life. Like, I grew up in a low income family. My parents were divorced. And there was, some serious sessions in my life that I went through that I think that a lot of other folks who didn't necessarily have that fire to keep them going would have not necessarily been able to keep going on, right? But there's something in here, something in here. I have a bigger purpose. I've got things to give back now that I've experienced so much in my life, and I've got all of these different learnings and lessons and things that I can feel like I can share, and I can help make life easier for other people. And that is that fire that really just keeps me going. Every day I know that there's a bigger purpose and I can see it. So I'm here now. I can see where it is, and I've got that fire to keep going to get there.
Yeah, I hear you. I have the same, and I know we have a lot of the same background. And it just won't go away. And sometimes I wish it
Mm,
would, sometimes I wish I
I
could
know.
just commit to a full-time job
Could
and
you imagine at the
be
city?
happy and just keep, plunking away. But for whatever reason, whenever I do that, there's that thing inside
Yeah,
me that's like, what are you doing? You need to
yeah.
be, on this mission. And so you've worked in the cannabis industry for many years and as a herbalist for years before that. I think it's safe to say you're a proponent of plant medicine. Can you speak a little bit about how and why you took that road?
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one because kind of when I look back and now realize the role that plant medicine has played in my life, it's a bit shocking, right? To actually sit back and look at my life as a whole and see what those big influential pieces really were. But as long as I can remember, I've loved plants. Like, again, kind of like I had chatted about with my entrepreneurship, going back to the early earlies. I can remember when my parents were still together. So that was like before I was 5. I can remember always being in the backyard and harvesting things and making potions and, grinding grass into paste and, putting it on like cuts and stuff like that. Like, just things that I just naturally did when I was a little kid, always, gardening and making gardens, never wanting to weed or anything, and never wanting to do like the real manual labor or
No,
anything, but
no.
planting the seeds, if you will. But the why I got into plant medicine, it honestly, it did start with cannabis, right? It totally did. And not kind of like, in 2013 when it became, a thing in Canada, when people started getting licensed producer licenses. Like, this happened way before that. This happened when I was I think I was about 15. I remember, I think it was grade 8. That's my first experience with cannabis. And it's funny, and I'll remove any names to protect the innocent who were with me at that time. But, in all seriousness, anyone who knows me from high school is probably like having a good chuckle right now. Oh, Allison and cannabis. Yes. But really, it's true. I remember the first time that I smoked cannabis. Um, it was the first time that I had a good sleep. And I know that sounds kind of insane. It's like, Allison, like, you're 15. Like, I'm sure you slept well before that, but really, no, I didn't. I was a very, very troubled kid, right? I had a lot of barriers facing me when I was a young folk. And so I can remember even being 8 years old and staring at my alarm clock at 3 o'clock in the morning, wondering if I was ever going to get to sleep. All of those different pieces of how kids process traumas. But then cannabis gave me the sleep that I needed. And I remember that I was on board from that day forward, right? It just was something that I probably didn't realize back then, that like, oh, wow, look, cannabis is benefiting my life, right? But it was just like, I had this amazing sleep. I felt great after I used it. I felt refreshed. And it just became part of my life from there. And like, sure, did I abuse it at times? Like, definitely through periods of my life. But then again, maybe not. Like, is it abuse if you're using it as a medicine? Right? Like, that's something that I look back on, right? Because, my parents will give me the gears sometimes every once in a while. Oh, yeah, when you were such a stoner. Really? Was I? Was I? Or was I like finding relief in this medicine? Right. So if you're living a productive life with good relationships and good health, is it really abuse? Right. Because had I went to the doctor back then, and said, well, I'm not sleeping, or I've got anxiety, or I've got this, that, and the other thing, like, they would probably load me up with sleeping pills, anxiety meds, antidepressants, right? So if cannabis helped me through some of these really hard years, was it really abuse? Right? It's something to think about. So, when I look back, that really was that point in my life where plant medicine rolled in. That's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's really interesting because today with everything being legal and being allowed to smoke or consume, I should say, um, would it be different if it was back then? There was this big stigma around it, and really that is what you were doing, was like self-medicating. And I mean, it was
It's
fun at the
true.
same time too,
Yeah,
but
totally. Right.
the
Yeah.
benefits certainly outweighed it.
Yeah, I think so, and then, the other part of the question is that, you kind of mentioned like, how did I sort of get into plant medicine? And, we kind of covered the why a bit, but, the how, there's, a few other components to that, right? Like, with the self-medicating, as I just sort of chatted about, that kind of continued as I grew up, and my health was awful growing up, right? Like, I mean, and again, I think just as a youth with the barriers that I faced, yeah, I had all kinds of different issues and, anxiety. And like I said, sleeplessness, I had, major digestive issues and stuff. And so, with that, I never got any relief from mainstream medicine. In fact, the doctor that I had in Port Alberni, and again, I'll protect the innocent in case that guy's still alive, but I can remember going in there with symptoms, and he would open up his insight, like encyclopedia, his like, his big doctor manual, and he would look up my symptoms and flip through and be like, I think you have this. And then kind of look at the corresponding medication that I should be taking, and then he would send me on my way. Right. And
Hmm.
so it all kind of started, coming together. And then I had an experience in my, I think, I don't know, 19, maybe I was 19 or 20. And I had an experience working at a health food store. And so once I actually ended up working at that health food store, I really started waking up about the truth of our food and medical industries in Canada, right? So some of the things that the gals were telling me who worked there were shocking. Right. And then it all started making sense. I was like, okay, with my medical history up until now and my experience there, this is really starting to make sense. Right. And so then after that job at the health food store, I had decided that I was going to study natural medicine, and my goal originally was to become a naturopathic doctor. And then part of the other side of me thought was like, oh, well, with the natural medicine education, then chances are, if cannabis ever becomes legal, this was again, 20 years ago, right? That I said this, maybe even a bit more than 20 years ago, that I would be an ideal person to do things in the cannabis space if I have this education behind me, and if I've got this experience and I've got this knowledge, then it would just make sense that I would be like a really attractive person to have on a team of a cannabis company, right? So I think that was a big part of the how. But after about 2.5 years ish towards moving towards the whole naturopathic doctor thing, I just realized that the one-on-one thing just wasn't for me. Right. It was just, me. I'm a sucker inner with emotions and stuff like that. I have a really hard time, separating other people's emotions from myself and not taking it all on. And so, when I started kind of doing some practicum stuff, it was just really emotionally taxing. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall that that necessarily wasn't going to be the road that I was going to go into. So I ended up just pivoting and deciding to do a business degree instead. Right. So I said to myself, like, oh, well, I could probably do business in the field of natural medicine. Right.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily have to be the practitioner, but I could be working on the business. And so that's exactly what I did. And so after I did some kind of executive work before I went back to university for business, I took a little bit of a break, worked in the natural medicine industry in a management role, just really got clear that I loved that space. I really liked the back end business side of things. And so I went back to university, got a business degree at UBC. And then when I was finished there, I went back into the natural medicine space and I worked for a few centers for natural medicine. And I was surrounded by naturopathic doctors and integrative medicine. And I just saw life changing scenarios that people just don't see in mainstream medicine. Right. And so it was all of this awakening that was just such a good experience. And then just seeing all of these different scenarios, I ended up really vibing on the plant medicine side of things. And I got headhunted to go into the cannabis industry, kind of like just as I had sort of planned in my head. I was like, yeah, if I get this education, I, probably will work in the cannabis space. And then I did. And I worked there, for about 7 years, and then I cashed out to do my own thing on the entrepreneurship side of things in around 2019, with a few, hiccups in between. I ended up, you and I have chatted about this before, but I ended up getting diagnosed with MS. I think it was 2011 or 12. And, continuing on the topic of my brutal experience with mainstream medicine, I was basically told to take this $5,000 a month injectable. Right. And that I would likely be in a wheelchair by 2016. And, the way that it was progressing. Right. And so looking back, I'm just remembering all of these different things that sort of like pushed me towards this plant medicine side of things. And, I'm really glad too that my experience with mainstream was so bad when I was diagnosed with MS, because had it not, my neurologist was a total jerk. And, had he not been a total jerk, perhaps I wouldn't have looked so deeply into natural medicine, right? So after that whole diagnosis and, the whole cannabis industry side of things, I was determined to heal. My relationship with plant medicine just really grew tenfold, and it became a critical part of how I was able to heal from MS. Like that's a whole nother podcast. So maybe we should like schedule that for schedule
Yeah, we
that
should,
another
because I'm
time.
sure people are very curious, and I know, sort of where you're going with your own business now, sort of, goes into that. So we can certainly talk. But I mean, you're fine, and you were obviously
Yeah.
successful, as are many people who, venture into the natural medicine space,
Yeah.
and alternative approaches. So
So
like
true.
it's just incredible, and
Yeah.
I'm,
Thanks.
so happy that you're okay.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's been cool. It's been such an interesting journey. It really has. And kind of circling back to how cannabis kind of started it all. It is a really interesting thing, right? Because I still do use cannabis regularly, and plant medicine is part of my daily life. I'm not really an alcohol person anymore, thank God. But my cannabis side of things has gone into a bit of a connoisseur style relationship, because my knowledge level has gotten so deep from working in that industry for so long. And it's gone way past the old, oh, would you like a sativa or an indica, right? It's gotten into terpenes and CBD and THC and, all of the different subtypes. And it's a beautiful thing when you kind of like can realize that full spectrum of what cannabis and all the different strains can do for you. And that played a big part of getting to where I am now. But yeah, after the whole MS thing, and plant medicine played a big part of it, but so did this entire sort of four-pronged approach that I had created to get myself here now. So yay, plant medicine.
Yes. And for anybody listening, I'm going to be posting Allison's website, and you can reach out to Allison to like talk if you want advice on the path to take, or the road to take, or where to start looking with a diagnosis like that.
Yeah, anything
Definitely
autoimmune.
there.
It's so interesting, right? Because when you go through that, yeah, like autoimmune is kind of like just a general umbrella, and then there's so many different types of autoimmunity underneath it, right? Rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's and all the different types of things, lupus and scleroderma and all these types of things. Really, it just comes down to autoimmunity. And so I'm definitely happy to share whatever I can to help make other folks diagnosis and plans for health a little bit easier.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll get a lot of people reaching out. Okay, so aside from cannabis and herbs, what other plant medicines have you used? I already know the answer to this, but I just
Right. I know. I'm just like, do we have a disclaimer on this?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, man. Again, the whole spectrum of plant medicine, talking about umbrellas and, everything that, you know, goes from the, shelf of the natural health food industry to, gray area pieces, right? And so the gray area pieces, I think, is a really interesting thing to sort of chat about right now, right? So, I think the other big category is psychedelics, right? Huge, huge category. And, there's a lot of buzz about it now. After the cannabis industry kind of sort of like peaked and kind of leveled off, then, all of the, investors started being like, well, what's the next big thing, right? So psychedelics, right? So that kind of brought it back to the forefront. But, with that, there's been amazing research and so many great things that have happened with psychedelics, right from, I think, like the 50s and 60s. Like there was great research that was happening back then, right? But then reefer madness came in and everyone, the war on drugs, and all of the promising research on psychedelics just got squashed, but it's making a comeback, which is awesome, right? So,
Mhm.
when I think about the psychedelics, kind of like the first thing that comes to my mind is that, like, when you get diagnosed with something that has no cure, whether it's an autoimmune disease, whether it's cancer, like whatever it is, you either identify with that disease and succumb to it, or you slap it in the face and pave your own path, right? So I did the latter, right? I wasn't going to be Allison with MS. Like that was the thing that actually, like, it actually physically like makes me angry even thinking about it. Was just like, my name's Allison and I have MS. No, no, you cannot identify with a disease like that and give it power, right? Like you've got to take it by the reins and take it where you want to go, right? Not Allison with MS. I'm Allison with a whole lot more going on, right? So I wasn't going to succumb to that. And so, because I had been exposed to so many different areas of natural medicine and, impossible stories from, when I was managing clinics and, involved in naturopathic clinics, I knew that I could heal if I paired a healthy body with a healthy mind, right? And so how does one get a healthy mind, right? Now that's a question that that everybody could use the answer to right about now, right? But if you're going to go outside of mainstream medicine for healing, you have to go into it with an open mind, right? And how do you get an open mind? Right. Years of psychotherapy. Well, I don't know about you, but mine costs $200 a session for psychotherapy, right? So it is not a cheap journey to like get that open mind through years and years of psychotherapy. And that's the other thing, years and years, right? Like I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on therapy to get to where I am today. But the biggest changes that I actually really did experience were through psychedelics, and the fastest, right? So when I would look at even discussing psychedelics, because had we had this, meeting 2 years ago, I don't think we'd be talking about this right now because, it's like, oh, we can't talk about psychedelics. Like,
Yeah.
it's not on the table. It's so hush hush. It's so taboo, right? But, if you think about it, so many major medical discoveries had roots where the promoters were labeled as quacks and then proven to have merit later down the road, right? And so that's exactly kind of what's happening with psychedelics, right? The OGs of psychedelics back from 50s, 60s, and 70s, they originally, like, they were labeled as quacks, right? And even the folks that are promoting it now, some of them are, still being labeled as quacks. But if we remember what it looks like for major medical discoveries, is so many of them become something that is groundbreaking after everybody gets over the initial shock and and structure of calling folks quacks as they started this. But with that, I really weighed the pros and cons of investigating psychedelics at the age that I'm at now, right? Again, it's one thing when you're a teenager and you're growing up in a small town and somebody's got some mushrooms and it's something that you experiment with as a teenager, right? But as an adult in the professional space, when I was revisiting what psychedelics looked like, really when I was looking at the pros and cons, like the pros just absolutely won out because I was not about to leave my health in the hands of people who weren't willing to look at the body as a whole, right? Like, I think that that was just
Absolutely.
such a critical part, right? Is that, so many mainstream medical practitioners are only looking at one part of the body, right? And so they give no merit, and I can't say all of them, but many of them don't give merit to natural medicine with regards to healing. So I decided to take the path of other awake folks like Dr. Gabor Mate, for example, right? If anybody's familiar, I know you are, but if anybody else
Mm,
is familiar with his research, right? He's an absolute gem. But I've done all kinds of different psychedelic therapy. Ayahuasca was an interesting experience, right? I ended up doing a ceremony just outside of Vancouver with a doctor of Chinese medicine and a South American trained shaman. And again, that's a whole nother podcast, right? Like my whole experience with that, because it was like a 3-day weekend, a whole retreat. And, there were things there that you couldn't even touch via years of therapy that were literally healed in a weekend. Like I left my husband on a Friday night and came back on a Tuesday, and like I felt like I was a completely different person. It was a glorious thing. And, when I kind of look back at growing up and experimenting with macrodose mushrooms when we were younger, like I do really believe and support that all of the latest research coming out with macrodose mushrooms and ketamine therapy and all of that kind of stuff, on depression and anxiety and trauma healing. Like I remember, like after every time we experimented that way as a teenager, like I would have incredible insights the next day, and every time I did a session it was life changing, like every single time. And even if it was just something as small as, oh, let's say some girl in high school was being a jerk, and then, we had a can of, or a mushroom session on the weekend, and then I come back and I was like, I don't even care what that person thinks, because it like healed that piece of me that was like, I just don't even care. Why did I care about that? Right. So like just healing these traumas. And then aside from the ayahuasca piece and the macro dose mushrooms from back in the day, microdose mushrooms, right, is a total thing right now. And that's something that I totally do on the regular. It kind of started when, again, some of the stigma started coming off of that, when some of the great minds in the world right now started talking about it and saying like, hey, this is an incredible therapy. There's a lot of benefits with attention and mood stability. And again, just like processing the traumas that you are living with on the day-to-day basis, right? So microdose mushrooms is definitely something that is a regular part of my life. Tolerance breaks, though I do take tolerance breaks. And even with like a degree of neurodiversity, with nearly all folks have some level of it, I've noticed massive improvements with attention span and all of that, right? So I've definitely had my fair share of experience with psychedelics. I've been involved with, some research in the space, and I'm really familiar with some of the companies that are making waves in the space as well. So it's a great thing to see people talking about it more, and seeing, what kind of was this, gray area turn into more of an accepted therapy. So lots of experience with that. And it for sure has played a big part, I think, even in my own journey with MS and like autoimmunity, right? Because if you think about autoimmunity and you think about it almost metaphorically, like what is autoimmunity? Your body's attacking itself. So I was attacking myself. My body's attacking myself. So what is it? Is it my thoughts? Is it something that I'm taking in? Is it something that I'm exposed to? Well, if you're constantly looking in the mirror every day, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I suck, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not skinny enough, or I'm not smart enough, I'm not worthy enough. It's like attack, 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 right? We got to think about the whole effect of what that looks like. And so if you can engage in a therapy like psychedelics to help remove some of those deep-seated beliefs that picked up through either generational trauma or through just general trauma of being a youth and a somewhat disadvantaged environment, then it starts to really make sense that there's ways for us to get past this. And, again, circling back to folks like Gabor Mate, it's really theorized that there's a large component of psychological trauma, and nobody, obviously your doctor probably won't tell you this, right? When it comes to autoimmunity, right? There really, really
Yeah,
is.
it's fascinating just to touch on the Gabor Mate piece. The
Yeah.
book, When the Body Says No, is huge in that, talking about
Hmm.
all the different sort of diseases and cancers and how they did studies and
Hmm.
how they correlate to specific
Yes.
personality traits.
Oh, right.
You know, like this we standardized almost can see that this
Yeah.
specific disease, the person that
Yeah.
comes in, like I think the study researchers were
Yeah.
seeing, like when someone would come in the door, they'd do like a personality test and they could
Yeah.
check off and say like, I guarantee this person has this disease.
Yep.
And then sure enough, it would show up. Like it's
Yep.
so fascinating
It
and to
is.
be able to start working with psychedelics to start changing your mind. And
Yes.
I think a huge piece, my next question sort of leads into Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. But
Mhm.
a component that he talks about in there is just how it helps to dissolve the ego. So it
Yeah.
dissolves a lot of that, like, yeah, that repetitive inner dialogue that we're constantly telling ourselves that
Yeah.
naturally will have a physical effect on our body and our systems.
Yep.
And after a lifetime of doing that, like it's going to manifest physically if you're not working on your mind at the same
Yep.
time. So
So true.
so in this book, How to Change Your Mind, he talks early about how, as we age, we sort of stop finding the time to have these kinds of experiences. Of course, like we talked about as teenagers doing, like I did a lot of psychedelics as a teenager, and
Yeah.
that was highly illegal at the time. But I really do think it sort of led the path for
It
me
did.
to be open minded and to take
Yep.
alternative routes and to look at alternative health and all these things. So he sort of says in the book, which I really loved, was that psychedelics are incredible tools for navigating the second half of life, which really got me thinking, like, yeah, like we just don't, like, well, you have
Yeah.
kids and you have jobs, you don't have time to just, eat mushrooms all the time.
Right.
But to make the time to do that and to, you know, start working on your brain or
Yeah.
your mind or your thoughts and getting through these experiences. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So would you agree with that?
I do. I totally do, you know. Um it's so interesting, right? Because like entering my 40s has literally been the best part of my life. I know it sounds crazy, right? Because, I can remember being in my 20s and 30s and being like, nah, I'm going to turn 30. Oh, no, I'm going to turn 40. This is the worst, right? But then I remember one of my girlfriends saying to me, like, Allison, life starts at 40. She's a couple years older than me. And I'm like, bullshit. Right. And I'm like, you're just saying that because you're 40. Right. But then I turned 40 and she was totally right. She was totally right. It was like this whole different perspective really kind of rolled in. And, now that I'm entering this stage in my life, like I am so much deeper than I was before. And again, looking at how psychedelics played that role, I think it was pivotal. It was absolutely pivotal because again, like I've years and years and years of therapy. And I never had such incredible leaps of self development as I did when doing psychedelic therapy, right? So,
Mhm.
if you think about it, so much of life in your 20s and 30s and stuff is focused on surface things, right? Material things and caring what people think about you and always putting yourself last and just constantly people pleasing, right? Kind of like this whole someone tell me I'm worthy kind of a shit that happens in your 20s and your 30s where it's just sort of exhausting, right? And so again, circling back to spending so much money on just general psychotherapy, but when I look back, it is that psychedelic piece that really gave me this opportunity to heal. And I am such a documentary monger. Like I know you and I are always texting about like, oh my God, did you see this one? Did you see that one? Right. But I've watched so many documentaries about psychedelics, and I've been involved in so much research on psychedelics, not only with clients and whatnot that I've had over the years, but also just because I'm just interested in reading research on psychedelics. I bit nerd out a little bit. If you haven't seen Fantastic Fungi, definitely one to start with. I think you've seen it. But research and history shows the amazing potential of psychedelic therapy, and with our mainstream medicine system so tragically behind and just wrapped up in red tape, and conflicts of interest, that this piece just isn't necessarily being embraced in mainstream
Mhm.
medicine, right? So that again, as we're getting to like the 40s and 50s and beyond, we kind of really have to look at what is available to us to continue bettering ourselves, right? And, with that, I think it's really helped me break through the shell of what I thought I was. And it's brought me to being able to embrace my true self and be cool with the person that I am and present my true self to the world, right? And stop people pleasing, right? Because again, had you and I circled back 2 years ago, I wouldn't be talking about psychedelics right now. I'd be like, oh my God, that's going to affect my course of my career if someone knows that that I experienced psychedelics, right? Can't
Yeah.
talk about that. Can't talk about that. That's just bad, is bad for business. At this point, I just don't mind. Oh my God, get your blood out of here. He's just, see, Herb doesn't care
Yeah.
about anything. Herb has definitely had his experience with psychedelics as well. But yeah, again, just putting myself first, living my best life. I really do attribute a lot of that to all the experiences that I've had throughout my life, and a big part of that is definitely psychedelics. So I definitely think Michael Pollan is he's right on point.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I love that. I totally agree. I think, we spend our 20s and 30s sort of looking for that outside validation. Am I worthy? Am I good enough? I need a title. I need a designation to prove that I'm worthy. And then you just sort of never get it. Well, at least I
Yeah.
never did. And when you
Yeah.
sort of hit your 40s, you realize, like, okay, I'm the only one who can give this to myself. What is wrong with my brain that I'm not
Yep.
giving this to myself? So then you start doing the deeper work, and it really is just such a powerful tool to be able to do that and to just get deeper, like you said, and have a more fulfilling life and be happier and more
Yep.
content. Like, maybe, there's other avenues to doing that, but that's not the road that I want to go down. I don't want
Yep.
to be on meds for the rest of my life
No,
to be on a surface level happy. I want
totally.
deep fulfillment
Yes.
and contentment, and I think that path is really the road to go for that.
Yep. Wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree.
So we need to start doing psychedelic retreats, is what you're saying.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
I think
I
I would love to
love
do a
that.
whole podcast actually on people's experiences with ayahuasca, because it's just so
Oh
fascinating.
my gosh.
I had, one incredibly
Yeah.
pivotal ceremony in my life as well, and I've heard it described as 25 years of therapy in one
Yep.
weekend.
Totally.
And I would
100%.
absolutely agree with that as well. It's incredible.
Mhm. I love it. I would love to chat about it again.
Yeah.
I think I wrote it down somewhere. I think I like wrote my whole experience down when I got back on the weekend or on the week after. And gosh, I need to find that because like I can
Yeah.
remember tidbits of it, right? Some of the things that I was really meant to remember, but a lot of those other pieces I would love to kind of like relive that experience. Like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's all flooding into my mind as
yeah,
mine as well. It's
I love
just so
that.
so cool, and I love hearing other people's stories too.
Totally.
Um, so where are we at here? What would you say? I mean, I guess you've sort of covered a lot of that, so maybe I'll move on to. Oh yeah. So after a long and winding health journey, self-discovery, an immense experience that we've, just covered, and going through the entrepreneurial space, you're heading into coaching to share this
Hmm.
wealth of knowledge and experience with others. So that is super
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is. And again, thinking back to 20s and 30s and what I thought that I would be doing now, it's just really interesting because I look back at all the different major experiences that I've had in my life, and what they've given me. And I have lived one hell of a life, and if I can share what I've learned to help reduce the pain and struggles that others have to go through, like I'm here for it, right? um you know it's kind of resonating to just kind of chat a little bit more about the MS thing and sort of how that piece is coming into coaching, right? Because in the past I have mainly focused again just on business coaching, mentoring, right? But now that I'm really starting to see that there isn't a separation between business and health and personal life, work life balance and stuff. Like this isn't like, oh, everything's got their little compartment. It's all one big thing, right? And so, with the MS side of things, people that get diagnosed with this have so little information available to them, right? They are really all just forced to listen to their doctor, right? And they have no idea where to turn. They are basically just turned into compliant patients when really the folks that are having success in halting and reversing autoimmune conditions. Oh, there's Herb's butt again. I'm sorry. But see, here's the thing. I don't really care. I've become this person that has a cat on their desk for
Right.
podcasts and live broadcasts. It happens. Herb's always on my desk and I just don't care anymore. But again, just, looking at what people are having to deal with when they're being diagnosed with something like this. Like I was only 28 or 29 when this happened to me, right? And I can remember what it was like. I was almost 160 pounds, and 120 is about like my happy place, right? I was exhausted, I was always bloated, brutal digestive systems, I was so stressed out, clenching my jaw all the time, my skin looked awful. Every day by 2 o'clock, I can remember like I could barely stay awake, and the brain fog was just nasty. And then after a bout of optic neuritis, and the presenting symptoms from there, that's when I was given the diagnosis of MS, right? So that was like a pivotal moment. And, as I mentioned earlier, my neurologist was just horrible. And, I remember that he came in, he literally like slapped the diagnosis on the table basically. And when I had the chance to ask a few questions, one of them was with regards to natural medicine and treating MS, right? I said to him, I was like, well, what are people doing in the natural medicine space for MS? And I can remember what he said. And he's just like, they end up in the hospital in 3 months and then they'll listen to me in what I tell them to do. And I remember being so shocked when he said that. I was like, dude, I was just asking a question, right? And so I remember, he was a very intimidating guy, right? And so I remember, just respectfully acknowledging him because he's no dummy either, right? He's a freaking neurologist. He's been to school forever. He's obviously a smart man, but no, zero bedside manner, right? And so, I respectfully kind of acknowledged what he said, but then I asked again. I was like, okay, no, I understand that, but what do they do? Even if they do end up in the hospital 3 months later, like what are they doing? And I can remember him like staring at me for this awkwardly long amount of time. And it was just like you could hear these crickets practically. I was just like, okay, what's he going to say? What's he going to say? And what he said to me was, I don't have time for you. And then he stood up and he walked out, and his receptionist let me know he wasn't coming back. And at that moment, I was again 28, 29, worst news in my life. And yeah, I was so overwhelmed. And I remember my ears started ringing and I started seeing these spots in my eyes. And I was like, I just need to get to my truck. I just need to get to my truck. And I thought I was going to pass out. I managed to leave and get into my truck where I just had like this massive meltdown. And I remember this pivotal moment of sitting in that parking lot in my truck. And that was the moment that changed my life because I decided right then and there that I was going to prove that guy wrong. I was going to heal myself and I wasn't going to let him dictate what my future was going to be. Right. And so, circling that back to what we're chatting about with, moving into coaching people and helping people, like many people wouldn't have been able to do what I did because I did have that basis in natural medicine. I already kind of had that experience that, hey, I've seen a lot of stuff in the natural medicine space. I have seen people heal from all kinds of different things when mainstream medicine told them that they wouldn't. And so, like, just I imagine the thought of what if I would have had somebody to help me through that time, right? Because I spent thousands of hours doing my own research, and I'm not even shitting you with the thousands of hours. Like, I remember I think I was third year university. I had a job at the city to fill my summer. I quit, as soon as I was diagnosed, and I was like, nope, it's research time. And I dedicated, I should say, the summer to doing the research that I needed to do to kind of get to where I was. And so, being able to share what I did and to give people hope and to help them realize that they've got options beyond the prognosis of what the doctor has told them their disease is going to be like, and pair that with my business and entrepreneurship journey, then it all just kind of, naturally aligned because on the business side, as I grew my career and as I started doing more speaking events and, media interviews and all that type of stuff, the community started to be a little bit more aware of what I was doing. And so then I was approached by a business accelerator that offered me a role as an executive in residence where, I would consult and I would work with entrepreneurs and I would mentor them. And then I also would teach through the accelerator. So I taught marketing and sales and business development and all kinds of other things, investor relations. And then with that, I really did realize that, to get to success in business, it's more than just business. Right. It's not, again, circling back, it's not like these segments of business and personal development and health, it's this like holistic journey. And so, again, I think back to what it was like when I started going through all of this. And if I would have been able to have somebody who had all of that information, oh, it would have just been like a guiding light,
Well, there
but
is no support. There's no support like
no,
for that,
zero.
aside from just a therapist, but
Yep.
like we're just expected to like work in our entire lives and,
Hmm.
deal with your emotional stuff on your own time
Hmm.
and be a huge success.
Yeah. Oh, I
But
know.
it's
It
just
is.
not so straightforward. It's like
No.
there's so many factors that play into your success and your well-being and your
Yep.
health and it's all, you know,
Yep.
cross-dimensional and
It
it's
is. It is.
to
It's
have
all tied
somebody there to
together.
support, it is, yeah.
Yeah, I remember this fella that I was chatting with on a business call a couple years back. And I remember him talking about work-life balance. And he's just like, there is no period where work ends and life begins. And life ends and work begins. Life is work is life. And I was just like, ooh, the wisdom, right? Like, he was a really interesting fella. And I just remember tucking that in the back of my mind. I was just like, yeah, you're right. Like, there is no, well, I'm going to get some just life coaching, because work is life. Life is work. I'm not just going to get business coaching because business is your life. And so, being able to kind of come to the table and be able to give back, because again, I think that's the most rewarding thing for me is to be able to give back. And I've helped so many people through autoimmune issues. It just over the last few years of just running into people, right? And they'll be like, "Oh, did you hear about Allison? Did you hear what she did?" Or sometimes my naturopathic doctor will get somebody that comes across her desk and it's like, find this chick on LinkedIn. She's been through the rigmarole. She's had this, been diagnosed. It's 12, 13 years later. No signs, no symptoms of progression. Everything is as per normal for her. Talk to her. Right. And so I'm so excited to be able to make other people's lives easier. And it just gives me a massive good feeling inside to be able to take some of that burden off of some of the other folks who are trying to build their careers and then also be sidelined by something in their life that just presents a challenge that makes building a business a hell of a lot harder than just building a business.
Right? Like I can only
Yeah.
imagine if I'd had that kind of support going through my career because I mean it's really
Right.
been like a story of like trial and error and a whole lot of error, right? Like
Hmm.
I can easily tell you all the things that I do not want, but I
Right.
still am sort of searching for exactly what it is that's aligned and to be able
Yeah.
to not have to go through the process that I went through. And I mean, maybe that's all part of the journey, but to have that guidance and support during that
Yeah.
would have just made everything so much easier.
Totally. Right. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I'm really
Thanks,
excited for
man.
you. I'm really excited to have, helped you get your website up and to
Yeah.
see, what comes next.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, and where we can intersect
Love that.
again. So I know we've had
Yeah.
some fun conversations about what the future holds. So
Oh, you got it.
what are you looking forward to most for next for Allison?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because sometimes I, go to bed at night and I sit there and think, be like, what do I want? What do I really want? And then I, kind of bring myself back to this same vision that has popped up over the years. And you and I have chatted a little bit about it in the past is again, it's this vibe of, giving back and sharing what we've learned with other folks. And when I break it down to kind of like the core. It is like self-actualization and enlightenment. I know that sounds ridiculous, right? That sounds like, oh my gosh, okay, Gandhi, you know what I mean? Like sounds something like that, enlightenment, right? But
Mhm.
if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the triangle of, different pieces of the puzzle that need to be in place before you actually get to that self-actualization piece where you're ready to give back, and you're taking this higher look or a higher perspective view on life and relationships and family and all that kind of stuff. That's what I'm going towards, right? And so I'm there. I'm totally there. I'm ready for it. I really want to share what I've learned. I really just want to give back. All of the horrendous experiences that I've been through in my life. I'm here now to kind of give back and to help others who are going through those same experiences. And, from a material perspective, right? I've got a portfolio of brands that are out there on the market and, doing their thing, and that's awesome and all, but what really fills my cup the most is helping people get through those experiences that I didn't help, that I didn't have help for. And so, working with entrepreneurs, individuals, that's something that I do on the regular basis. Sometimes I work with folks who don't have businesses that are just, working at, building their career in a certain direction. I've done some speaking events, which I'm really enjoying, but everything kind of really just focused on that trio of, health and business and entrepreneurship. But then, you add the whole being a woman piece into it, and being a woman entrepreneur, being a woman executive, and, all of those things that you kind of come across. That is what I'm looking forward to doing, is working with folks that, kind of have similar goals, that are going through some challenges, in those areas. And then I'm hoping to talk a little bit more on some social channels. I know I've always avoided a lot of social media, again, because um I don't want to get caught up in, oh wow, look at what they're doing. Look at their highlight reel. I'm not as good as them. I'm not, as pretty as that person, or I'm not aging as well as that person. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. Like, I'm so kind of disenchanted with social media, and the way that people are engaging with it, right? It's just like every other minute people are on there posting pictures of their, nicest smile and their, perfect angle and stuff like that. And again, that goes back to the whole people pleasing thing, right? I don't want to necessarily do that, but what I do want to do is I want to start to talk a little bit more on social channels that aren't so much focused on that whole image piece, right? Like, I like LinkedIn, those types of things. I want to talk a little bit more so that I can spread the word. I can help more folks. I can share more wisdom. That is where I'm going next. So, thank you so much for asking. I'm so
Yeah.
grateful that we've been able to chat about this stuff.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to, following along on that journey. And I know we've got, like I said in the beginning, we've followed a lot of similar paths in life. And I know we've got sort of similar
Yeah.
goals that we're striving for. And yeah, so I'm really just excited to
Thank you.
be alongside for the ride,
Yeah, thanks
for
for
whatever
being
part of it.
part of my circle of trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for, coming on here and sharing your story, because, that is part of, the goal here is to share these journeys and to share these stories and how we've gotten to where we are, and what's helped us is the goal of doing this monthly speaker series. So
It's awesome.
I really appreciate you taking the time
I'm
to
happy
share, and I will
to.
definitely link all your things so that people can
Cool.
reach out and
It's awesome.
access your services.
Love it. Love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, I will end things here. My child is
Perfect.
sitting at the top of the stairs
Oh,
waiting for me.
that's perfect timing. Mom, come on.
Yeah, let's go.
I need some Triscuits.
Exactly.
Good. Well, I'm glad that Herb really, got into the whole like self-cleaning kind of like mechanism in the latter half of our session there.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Thanks, sister.
Okay, thanks, Allison. We'll talk
Okay.
soon.
You
Okay,
betcha.
bye.
Bye.